Join our knowledgeable hosts as they dive into the captivating universe of comic books, movies, TV shows, and pop culture. Get ready for vibrant discussions and a shared enthusiasm for all things superhero and beyond. A comic podcast straight from the panels. This is Beyond the Capes.
All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Cape. With us today is Zach Quaintance. You might be familiar with him from Comics Beat, comic journalist, and we are here also to talk about his stunning new project, Death of Comics Bookcase. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Now, what's really awesome is obviously you're making your own comic book. That's what we're here to discuss. But you are also a journalist. I mean, at Comics Beat.
Yeah. I've been writing for Comics Beat for almost 6 years now. The main thing I do there is this column called Top Comics to Buy, and it comes out every Tuesday. I was actually working on it right before we hopped on here, but it's basically a rundown of everything new that's coming out, new number ones, trades, graphic novels, and then I usually pick 5 recommendations or I'll read anywhere from 20 to 30 new books coming out, and I'll just pick my 5 favorites for the week. It's a lot of fun. Forces me to keep up with everything, so that's cool.
Awesome. So, I mean, and when journalism, I'm assuming obviously you've been a comic book fan then for quite a while. That's safe to assume.
Oh yeah. Like, I don't want to tell you how old I am, but I grew up reading like kind of late 90s stuff, when I was a real young kid. I've been hooked on comics ever since. I mean, I took a few years off when I was at college, but got right back into it. Yeah, it's been a lifelong thing for me.
Okay. Now, was journalism always kind of like the end goal? Kind of starting out, like you always knew you wanted to write about something?
Yeah, so I'm actually a journalist. It's like my day job. Like, I went to college, studied journalism and everything. But what brought me to journalism was I wanted to write fiction. Like, I wanted to write my own stories. And journalism just seemed like the way to kind of more reliably get paid to do it, which kind of seems funny if you know anything about how much journalists get paid. But it was like a more stable way of doing that than trying to when I was 22 years old, write a novel or something, which seems a little ridiculous. But yeah, so that's been my job. I went to college for it. I worked in my college newspaper, and that's my day job. I work for a trade journal, kind of a dry technology magazine.
Awesome. I think a lot of people are going to be interested then. I mean, Comics Beat, everyone always has, especially comic book fans, we all have that dream of kind of getting on a column or getting on a paper for comic books. How does that happen? I mean, was it all this kind of right place, right time, or were you kind of working on this for a while?
There's a little bit of right place, right time. So what happened was, like I said, I got this job at this trade journal that covers technology, and it was really pretty dull. It's important, but dull. And so, as a hobby, I started this blog, Comics Bookcase, where it was just me, really, when I started it. And I started updating it twice a week. Then it became 3 times a week. All of a sudden, I'm updating it a couple times a day. And then what happened? I was on Twitter, and Heidi McDonald, she's done the beat for 2 decades now. This is actually the 20th anniversary for the beat this year. She put out an all call on Twitter looking for journalists, people with journalism experience, to cover San Diego Comic-Con. I was living in California at the time, in Sacramento, and I reached back out hey, I have a journalism experience. I have a comics blog. This seems like a really good fit. She agreed. I got a pass, and I flew down and went to Comic-Con and did an okay job covering the show for the beat. And we kept in touch after that, and then kind of started doing more and more, and have been doing it ever since. So that was San Diego Comic-Con 2018, and I'm getting ready to go to Comic-Con again this year for the beat this summer to do a few things for them. So yeah, it's been really cool. And the beat is really well respected in the industry. Everybody knows it, and they know Heidi. Heidi knows everybody. So it's been a really cool way to familiarize myself with both comics journalism and the industry side of things.
Awesome. What was that first assignment like then? I mean, going to a Comic-Con as the official press, because I know for us, we're going to C2E2 for our first press this year.
Yeah, going to press as a show is cool. Like it gives you a reason. It gives you like a mission over the course of the few days, which kind of changes the show a little bit. It's definitely different than like trying to wait in line and get exclusives or signatures or whatever else you're at the show to do. Like I for that first year I went, they were relaunching Vertigo that year. It was
Yeah.
2018. So they had a press roundtable, and I signed up to go for it, to attend it. So like I'm going to San Diego Comic Con for the first time. I'd never been, and going and like just taking it all in. But I also at the same time have to like navigate behind the scenes to like this DC Comics hosted roundtable, and I was sitting there with like Mark Russell and some other creators I really like, getting to ask them questions, which you really don't often have the chance to do if you're just there as a fan. So that was really fun. And then like I remember the big moment for me as like a comics journalist at that thing was they were Uncanny X-Men had been like on the shelf for a while as a title, and at that particular Comic Con they like announced the return of it, and so I had like my laptop in the panel and got the post up before any other outlet, and so like everybody at the beat was really happy about that. And it's like a rush, so it was like a deadline writing about comics, so like what's better.
Awesome. Now, with your background in journalism and writing, do you feel that has made it easier in kind of writing this story?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, cause I had just that year earlier, had been to South by Southwest for my job, like covering tech panels. So I was like, I knew how to be in a panel with your laptop out writing breaking news. Like I had practiced doing that from my day job, and I never would have like really kind of understood the urgency of being first with news like that, or like I remember that morning, I think the rumor was out there that maybe they were going to announce the Uncanny Return, so I had like written kind of the frame of a post before doing that. So that was all really useful. And then the other thing was just interviewing people. Like I'm sure, like you going to C2E2, you interview people for the podcast, it won't be a huge deal, But like
Yeah.
for print, like I had that experience as well. So I'd already interviewed a lot of people, and I knew kind of like to ask if I could record them and stuff like that.
Awesome. Um, now, the one thing I've always been curious, as a journalist, obviously you're used to kind of taking comics, making your list, kind of picking apart what you like and what maybe fell short. Do you feel like that you found yourself kind of going back and forth in the process of writing this comic book just because you had that background? Like, man, if someone wrote a piece on me, like,
That's a
would
good
they pick this
question.
apart?
Yeah, I wasn't too worried about that, to be honest with you. Like in the early stages of when I started writing my new book, like it was really kind of oblique to me that anyone would ever read it. Like I was writing it entirely for myself. By the time I started thinking about how people might react, I was already pretty well along. But I will say, like, what's been really helpful, it was like when it came time to promote it, like I really didn't seek out reviews or anything. Like I sought out more like podcasts and interviews to talk about it, because I had that background. Like I felt like that would get the word out a little bit better. Like I feel like reviews are more useful when you're working on established
Yeah.
publishers, like because people, I think people like to read reviews that week before they go to the shop and maybe try new things. And like when you're promoting a Kickstarter, um, it's really kind of a whole different game. But that is a really good question. This is my second comic. Like I wrote another one a couple years ago, and I was kind of more self conscious with that one. I think because I was thinking about reviewers, but it came out like no, people didn't like put it up on their websites and rip it to pieces. So like the second time around I was much like rather like, yo, if anyone's writing reviews and taking this seriously, I've succeeded because the comic is out there and it's high profile enough that people want to do that.
Yeah. And what's really impressive about this, having gotten the read copy of it, is it's obviously an anthology series. You state that on the Kickstarter. So you had to be working on these stories for a while because you put out a lot of content, just in what I read, which was very impressive. I mean, but I
Thank you.
gotta imagine that took a lot of time.
Yeah, man. Like I probably started writing the first one last February, and I took them one at a time. Um, but there's a couple ideas in this book that had been kicking around in my head for well over a year. Like it had been characters. I had ideas for characters that I wanted to turn into stories, and so yeah, it was a long a long process. And like what's really time consuming about writing something like this, where it's 6 different stories, all written by me with the intent of putting them in the same book, was like you kind of have to do the heavy lifting of a first issue with each of them, the way I did it, like, because I had to like establish the world, introduce you to new characters you've never seen before, with the exception of one of them, which kind of spun out of my first comic. And then, if that wasn't enough, within the space of 8 pages, give you an ending. Like, a lot of them are built to continue, but I did want to end them in a way that you didn't feel like it was unsatisfying or something. So like, I think it took a little bit longer, to do them shorter, almost. Like, if I was writing a full just if I was writing one 48-page comic of one story, I don't think it would have taken me as much time to do as these like 6 different worlds I basically had to create.
Definitely. The one thing I will say that it reminds me of, and this is probably what I think I love the most about this book, is the old Tales from the Crypt kind of EC comic books. That was exactly how the frame, for me at least, that's how it reminded me. I don't know if that was
Perfect.
your intention, but
A hundred
that is
percent.
what that's what I got.
Yeah,
Um,
no, that the frame is an homage to the EC Comics horror hosts, which I love, and I think is a really cool device. Like, I wasn't able to do this because um the artists were different for each piece, but I always like when the like host shows up in the last panel.
yes.
Like, that's always a lot of fun. But I did try in my framing device, like, to have the host and the characters commenting on what the story had just been, so it like really felt connected that way. But yeah, it was an homage to EC Comics, and then the other half of it was, there's a lot of inside jokes to my blog, my old blog, Comics Bookcase. Like, the horror host, anyone who's seen the page already knows, is a giant, terrible, anthropomorphic comics bookcase who's like telling the stories to these kids who like don't want to hear them.
No. Now, I mean, you picked a good time because I know Jason Aaron is just slated to reboot the EC comic books. I think a lot of people talk mainstream Marvel and DC. Did you find yourself growing up also being drawn to the EC comics?
It took me a while to get there. Like, I didn't come to those until I was an adult, to be honest with you. Like, as a kid, I mean, they weren't really available. Like,
Yeah.
I'm sure I could have maybe like special ordered them through my local comic shop, but like, uh I was reading, I mean, the gateway was like Marvel and DC, and then I like moved on. The late 90s and early 2000s were kind of a real like a low key golden age of like alternate superhero takes. Like, we had Astro City, we had Powers, we had this other book, the J. Michael Straczynski one, Rising Stars, I think it was called. And so like that kind of became an easy bridge for me to get from like big two superheroes to indie stuff. And then, so once that had kind of like opened the doors to Image and Vertigo for me, it was like game on. Um, but my first like introduction to horror comics was definitely Vertigo. Like, that was a great time on Garth Ennis and stuff like that. And then the EC comics came like much later as an adult, when I was like got really interested in comics history, and went back and started reading. I mean, they're pretty easy to get if you don't mind reading digitally, like,
Yeah.
or they were when Comixology was like really functional. But that's kind of how I came to those.
Yeah. I'm kind of in the same boat. I grew up, my uncle gave me my whole comics history. That was my life growing up. Was him. And I have a lot of the EC omnibuses. And it's
Those
crazy
are
reading
awesome.
them. They're very good. And it's hard to read them because you can tell exactly when a story starts, uh, kind of where the code, really
Yeah,
took
yeah.
down the tone of a story.
Yeah, and kind of boxed them in, and like I mean, the code was aimed at stopping them essentially. So like, it made it really hard for them. Yeah. You always think like, what could have been if that never happened? Like, if they weren't limited like that.
Um, what was the easiest part of writing this, and what was one of the hardest parts, kind of, writing this story?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest stuff was the frame, to be honest, like comics bookcase stuff. Like, I was doing that when I wrote it in order. Like, I didn't write. I wrote the first story, and then I wrote the frame pages that came before and after it. Then I wrote the second story and wrote the one frame page that came after it. And so like, what started to happen was like, I would work for weeks on an 8-page story, and it'd be like, it's writing's hard. Writing's a hard thing to do. Like you want it perfect and you want to keep pushing it until you get something interesting that's different than what's out there. And so there'd be this huge sense of relief when I finished a story. And then when I sat down to write the one kind of more fun frame page, it was easy. Like it
Yeah.
was like kind of like letting the air, like the tension was gone. I was like, oh hell yeah, like I can do this. This is nothing, you know. The harder stuff was the hardest thing was the apes versus sharks story at the very end. Like it sounds like it'd be more fun, but like that one took me forever, and like it ended up being really personal. Like I always tell people, like, yeah, there's a story in there about apes and sharks, and it might be the most personal writing I've ever done. Like as funny as that sounds, but that it was really hard to just kind of be honest about some things in your life, you know. Another hard thing was just coordinating all the creators. Like
Yeah.
I there was like 20 different creators on this book, and I was prepping the Kickstarter and trying to get a schedule together for it, and like this was late over here a little bit and that was late over there a little bit, and it was just keeping in touch with emails and things, because a lot of the creators I work for work with publishers and they have like hard set deadlines with them, and I'm just this Kickstarter guy who's like a little bit like I can launch my Kickstarter whenever I want, you know, like I'm
Yeah.
not beholden to an announced publishing schedule. So I had to kind of like keep on people a little, like just check in via email, and I, you know, that's tough to keep track of with that many people.
Definitely. Um, Now, the one thing I've always wondered is when people write anthology series and you do these short stories, was it hard when you got onto a roll with one story, just stopping at that moment, knowing that you have to either make another anthology series or continue it in a separate series?
Oh yeah, like there's two of them in here that I'm dying to continue, like that I'm actively pitching to publishers, and like I would do more of. So the first story is a horror story, and the name of the short is The Werewolf Priest, and it ends
Yeah.
on a bit of a cliffhanger, and like I'm just dying to do that in a full issue. Like I have the script, I love that artist, I love the way the colorists work with that artist. Like that story, it's killing me that like it's not that we don't have like um a home for it yet, because I'd love to do that one through a publisher, not through Kickstarter, you know, and like kind of get a 5 issue mini for that one. That's really tough. And then there was the fantasy story Gold Mask.
Yeah.
Uh, has a smart mouthed kind of aspiring dark mage character that I just love writing. Like I did not want to stop. That story kind of ends more neatly, but it's like a proof of concept for like, hey, let's do a whole series with this character and this team. And that character is just a lot of fun to write because he has no filter, and like I always like comics where the main character is a little smart alecky. So that's what I tried to do with that one.
Yeah, I think most of us agree it's fun. Because sometimes this get too serious. You just need that break. And I can also promise you, it's not just killing you. Reading that first story, the werewolf priest. Man, I was so sad to see that last panel. There's so many questions.
Yeah,
Um,
well, like it's all that story is in my head. Like I said, the whole first issue scripted, it's ready to go, and I have an outline to finish the whole series. I know where everything's going with that one. Like I would love to have news about that coming out of this Kickstarter. Like I think a lot of people, that seems to be this one of the standout stories in the whole book, like that people really react to, which I'm happy about.
Definitely. Now, obviously, again, being a journalist, kind of having your finger on the pulse for comics, um, as a new creator as well, or at least making a book in kind of a new plateau or terrain for comics, did you have a plan of going with an all digital or like a mix between digital and singles for this?
Like how I put it out, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, like so like the in being in making indie comics, you do have to like think of that a step ahead on that, like where your distribution's going to be, you know. And so I did go back and forth between like, um, am I going to do this as like a web comic, or like at one point I was like maybe I could start a Patreon and like do chapters of these stories on a Patreon or something. But I love physical comic. I like both. Like I read digital just because space is a consideration for some things, and like when you're doing the reviews, you kind of have to read digital. Um, but like I wanted it to also be a physical comic that existed. So Kickstarter felt like a really good fit to like um, pay for the print run and also like come away with a digital component to it. So we were able to kind of do both that way. And I think most Kickstarters usually do both digital and print for the most part. So yeah, that was a good fit. And I'd done a Kickstarter before, so I felt like I kind of like had a good idea of what I did wrong and what I did right, and could like come back and have a strong one, a strong campaign, and it's been pretty good so far.
All right. And then the follow up with that, obviously you have a lot of creators that kind of went with these different stories with you to get it out. Obviously the one thing that's strong, and I'm very surprised, I think Thundercats issue 1 can point that out. Have you ever thought about doing variants with like different stories being the front runner of that of that comic?
Yeah, I did
Um,
think about. I thought about doing a cover for every story that's in there. I and like maybe I will. Like maybe if this is successful enough, we'll do like a variant campaign. So people could get covers of each character. But at the end of the day, what I decided to do was like we went with the main cover, it's the Werewolf Priest. And I love that cover. It's John McCrea who drew Hitman with Garth Ennis, which was a favorite comic of mine when I was too young to be reading it, like, ways back. And then we went with kind of for the deluxe edition. Raoul Allen did the cover, and it's kind of a all. It's got a bunch of the different characters. It's like a werewolf claw swipe, but the characters are all peeking out of the claw, which I thought was really cool.
yeah.
And then we did do a variant for the Nick Cagnetti superhero story, The Responsibility, because I figured like if we have a superhero in our book, do a superhero variant. And so those are the three landed on. But yeah, I totally. There was a point early in the planning where there was going to be 6 covers, one for each character, but like that's also really logistically difficult as an independent
Yeah.
comic publisher to like fulfill that and find a price point for all those, and like that's also like 4 more creators brought on board to work within their schedule. So that was a thing I kind of moved away from. But there's plans to do volume 2 and volume 3 of Death of Comics bookcase. So like and some of these characters will be back, so there may be more covers moving forward.
Awesome. Well, that brings us to the main point of why we're here today, and that is Death of Comic Books Volume 1 for this anthology. If everyone listening here is interested, what is kind of the initial description you would give someone kind of off the street of this is what it's about?
Yeah, it's my vision of what I love about comics, like all rolled up into across genres. So like this is a book you can pick up and you can get horror comics and superhero comics, fantasy comics, sci-fi comics, crime comics. Like it's all in there. It's all what I love about the medium, and it's mixed with kind of like what's on my mind right now. So like there's a lot of like media stuff in this, like analysis of like the horror story is about there's a werewolf priest, sure, like that's the headliner, but it's also about the local news, you know. And then the superhero takes on AI, so it's really a mix of like everything I love about comics with what's on my mind, and like I think is kind of timely right now.
Yeah. And I will say that was one of the things that I found interesting about this story is you definitely included, you could tell from your stories, you included a lot of real world issues that we're facing currently. And obviously there's a personal touch to the stories, especially the last one, as you were talking about. Um, and I feel like some people are kind of stepping away. We're getting back to that kind of ungrounded sense in most comics. DC, I think, is doing a little bit of a better job at trying to keep it grounded, but Marvel seems to be going back to that kind of whimsical. I don't know if that's something kind of intentional for you, or you just prefer something that is kind of 1 foot on the ground, 1 foot off.
I think 1 foot on the ground and 1 foot off is the perfect way to describe it, because like I would describe every all 6 of these story concepts as totally absurd. Like like there's a werewolf priest. Like that's the first thing. A talking bookcase introduces you to a story about a werewolf priest. Like that's how it starts. But like what I tried to do was take these like really fun kind of like pulp EC style like classic comic setups and like take them very seriously. Like I've always really liked comics that do that. Like, I think Grant Morrison is a great creator who's always had these like kind of absurd, very comic booky ideas that get played totally serious. Like Seven Soldiers has Frankenstein on Mars with a sword, and it's a very serious comic. And so that was something that really inspired, I think, every one of the stories in this book was that kind of idea. Like you can do a story about a werewolf priest that's also like this is an experience I had working for a local newspaper that was very traumatic, so I'm going to tell it with a werewolf priest as kind of like the hook to bring you in, and then like make it a little more layered, with kind of my personal experiences. And I didn't like honestly did not intend to do that. Like it's just
Yeah.
kind of as I would come up with these concepts, and I wanted to make it better and go deeper and deeper and make it more unique to me, like to have this be my story, not like a story that only I could tell. And that's where like the kind of more serious stuff start, and real world like kind of timely stuff started to creep in, because it's like drawn from my everyday life or my history or whatever else, like fights I'm having in my family or whatever it may be, like that stuff kind of fought its way in to be right there alongside the like fun, for better or worse. But I think they all stay pretty fun though. I'd say. I mean,
Yeah, I
at
don't
the end
think
of the day.
anyone could walk away from reading the story and not have had fun with it, or at least get
Yeah,
invested in the stories too. I think that was definitely accomplished. I have been always curious the comics bookshelf, because that character felt. I mean, obviously that was the most fleshed out character because that's our host. I mean, that's who's giving us
yeah,
the story. So obviously he is for the most part front and center. So where does that come from?
yeah. That's that. When I was doing my blog, I was promoting it on Twitter really heavily, like a few years, like 2018, 2019. And I was on Twitter constantly talking about comics. I would like analyze the Marvel comics solicitations the day they came out. Like, oh, look at this artist on this, look at this cover and that cover. So just talking about comics all the time. And my Twitter handle wasn't my name, it was Comics Bookcase. And so people would refer to me sometimes as like, oh, great point, Mr. Bookcase. I'm like, I'm not a bookcase. Like, like there's a person writing this. And so, when it came time to like find a host, I was like, there might be a couple dozen people out there who remember my bookcase. Like, so I picked that for it. And then like, it's also oddly autobiographical, because the bookcase is like trying to put comics out there to people who might be a little hesitant, which I think when you're a first time creator is how it feels. Like
Yeah.
you want to make comics but you don't have an audience, and people like maybe don't, it's not that people don't want new creators, it's just that they have their favorites. Like they're you kind of have to work a little bit harder, and the bookcase is working very hard to like deliver these comics to these kids. Um and then I just want to talk about the design really quick. That Ryan Lee, who drew this book Mountain Head, it was like a IDW horror comic a few years ago. That was just awesome. He did such amazing stuff. To like the bookcase really moves around a lot in this story.
Yeah.
It's running after the kids. It's falling downstairs. It's like reading with these like hilarious glasses on. Like Ryan, like really. Went above and beyond to kind of develop the physicality for this bookcase. Like usually when you get character designs back from an artist, it's like your character's standing there, maybe turned to the side, maybe their head. Like he gave me a sheet of the bookcase, like kind of dancing. Like you can find it on his Twitter too, if you want to look him up on Twitter. But yeah, like that story just doesn't work without his contributions. And like um it was, I remember writing that frame and just thinking, I don't know where I'm going to find another human being anywhere who's going to get this. But like
Yeah.
as soon as I shown his script, like he got it and loved the humor, and like was excited to draw this monster, which was actually like based on the chair in Pee-wee's Playhouse. Like that was the reference photo I sent him. I was like, can you do this but like a bookcase and like maybe 2 degrees sadder? Like, can we just make it a little like the chair's too happy for what we're trying to do here, because it's kind of horror themed. So that's kind of how that all came together.
Yeah, and he nailed it. Which is funny too because I know you said there's 6 stories in the book, but one of my other favorites is what I consider to be the seventh story, and that is the story of the kids in the bookshelf. For the ending, and we won't talk about it yet. Everyone should definitely read it to see the ending. But uh, that took me by surprise. I hope though, we see more of those kids.
Yeah, definitely. So like, I mean, I'll just tell you, like, if it's Death a Comics bookcase, so you can kind of guess what's gonna, you don't know how it's gonna happen, but you can kind of guess what's gonna happen to the
No,
bookcase. Uh, but yeah, and I had to assure some early readers too, who were like, "Oh, this is such a sad ending." I was like, "No, no, no. Like it's volume one. Like there will be like this is not how it ends. And if it's funded pretty well right now, the campaign, but we need a little bit more to kind of like really hit the ground running with a sequel, like because I want to go right into making the sequel. And if we do a sequel, it would go from Death the Comics bookcase to Reign of the Comics bookcases, which would be like a callback to Death of Superman, but you would definitely see a Cyborg bookcase and bookcase of steel, and like the bookcase is not done by any stretch. So that's all I'll say about it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Now, if the campaign goes well, and we get funded for a volume 2, was it hard to think that do I do a handful of more new stories, or now do I take my top 2, top 3 that I really enjoyed from volume 1 and intermix it with less new stories?
It's super hard, yeah, because it's like um there, like I was saying earlier, there's some of them I want to do as a full mini series.
Yeah.
So like I don't necessarily want to continue those in the anthology because I'm like really hoping that I can find a publisher for a couple of these. But at the same time, if people like really like volume 1 and want to continue that story as fast as possible, it's like it feels less than ideal to not give that to them. So I think it's going to end up being a mix. Like I think you'll probably see another Gold Mask fantasy comic. You might see more of the superhero, if not in volume 2, then in volume 3 for sure. I also have some new ideas for contained ones that I'd really like to get to, and like different artists I'd like to work with. That's one of the really fun things about an anthology like this is you can really work with some great artists because you're only doing 7 to 10 pages. It's not, they don't have to commit their whole year to drawing it. Like you can get them to like work with you a little more easily, especially if you're not as established. So like yeah, I want to bring back a couple characters so that people don't feel like it's an entirely new book. So the bookcase would be back, Gold Mask would be back. There might be more of the Next Door, the crime comic, and then there's a couple of brand new ones. I love horror, so there might be like a different horror take that shows up in the second one.
Awesome. And yeah, this is one of those stories that's so fun, not only for the stories, but seeing the creators kind of maybe branch out, like doing a story maybe that they wouldn't have thought about doing. I know when I saw it, and I really wanted there to be multiple volumes that all come together to like form the bookcase. That is like one of my dreams at this point.
That's a great idea, like with the spines, like when
Yeah.
you stack them. Yeah, I might have to. John J. Hill is doing the logo and design for the book. I might have to put that idea out there. We'll see. That's a really
Awesome.
great idea. I can't believe
Yeah.
thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Now, the biggest thing for everyone listening to, that might be inspired by your story, is there one piece of advice that you wish someone may have told you kind of earlier on, like, hey, um, this will really help you. You got a great story, or you're doing this really well. Why don't you try this, or something that could help someone that kind of wants to jumpstart their own career?
Yeah, like I feel like I got a lot of really good advice that led to this book. But yeah, if I could have got it sooner, that would have been more helpful. One of those things was start with the shorter stories. Like if you're brand new to making comics, it's probably not the time to do your 150-page graphic novel epic
Yeah.
before you've even really kind of like got your feet under you and learned what it's like to collaborate with another person. Learned what it's like to format scripts, just all of it. There's so many little things you have to learn like in making a comic and think about that like you don't necessarily like you could be really well versed in reading comics like I was like lifelong, but I've learned so much in the process of making my one shot that I made a couple years ago. And then all like I felt like as I was doing these stories, I was learning more and more with each one. So like that, I think that would be the best piece of advice to start with is like start with a short comic for sure. Like start with a couple short comics and then kind of go from there. The other thing is just like and it's really hard because every collaboration is different, but like man, if you're working in this medium, like you need to be like a student of collaboration and how to be a good collaborator. Like one of the things I think I did really well in this book, and maybe the thing I did best in making this book was like I really did a deep dive into the work of all these artists. Like I paid close attention to what they had drawn, what they seemed to like to draw, like when they're posting their just like warm ups and stuff on Instagram, and like what kind of genre were they working in, what sort of characters were they fans of, and just like and I think that really paid off like huge because all six of these artists that worked on this book with me were my first choice. Like nobody was hesitant to work on it because I had a script. I had taken their work seriously and fit it well, like made sure it was a good fit with the script. And I had kind of a short ask and gave everybody a flexible timeline. So I would always make clear like I really want to work with you on this. You're my first pick. Like if you need 6 months, that's fine. We'll work within whatever amount of time you need.
Yeah. And it's funny too, the first piece of advice you give, man, a lot of people, I feel like that one just needs to be on a poster, like as soon as you walk into Comic Con or LCS, because we get questions too, coming up on our 1 year of, how'd you do it? How'd you get these guests? And they kind of like, they don't want to hear me say, well, I just kept on putting out posts until something happened, and I
It's
built
really
off
what
of
you,
it.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's not more complicated than that, man. Like it's the and I think comics more than any other medium rewards people who stick around in it. Like no matter what you're trying to do in comics, longevity works to your benefit. Like a lot of people show up in comics hot, like come in and be like, I have this big idea for a new website, a new podcast, a new comic. Like I'm gonna come in and shake up comics. I love comics. Like everybody here loves comics, man. Like, but you got to stick with it. You got to show that you're committed, build relationships with people, and like kind of pay your dues a little bit as you move forward.
definitely. Now, the one thing I really want to be curious with, especially with horror, people that kind of do horror stories. And obviously this is kind of what we're in. If you had the ability to take like a universal monster or like one of your favorite kind of horror creatures from a movie, do you have one that you would want to create a short story around?
Like classic Universal monsters.
You go classic. I mean, I've had people tell me from like Godzilla. Um,
This might be cheating because it's comics, but anything Hellboy, like like I would just absolutely like give an arm to like to like do a Hellboy story or like anything set with any of those Magnolia characters. Like I just love Hellboy so much. It's like my my guiding horror comics mix. Like I read a few years ago. I read like every Hellboy BPRD comic in order of publication. So like at like just to kind of like I'd read some of it here and there, but I wanted to go back and read it all as it was published just to see how it like evolved and kind of came together. And man, like that was a lot of work. Like I was reading one comic a day, and I think it took me 2 years, maybe longer. I don't remember, but like, but what an experience that was. But yeah, like, and I especially like the like Hellboy in Mexico story with the zombie turkeys. So like I guess kind of more with the spirit of your question, I would like to do more with those zombie turkeys from Hellboy in Mexico. I think that'd be really funny. But
well, the nice thing about Hellboy is you can take any supernatural story, horror story, and literally a giant red kind of devil with a stone arm just comes punching through.
yeah,
You don't really question it. You just kind of
no,
roll with it. You're like, yeah, okay, this kind of adds up.
yeah, like he's punched so many like ancient folk tales from all different cultures. Like Hellboy has punched his way through all of them. Like, and like sometimes aliens show up. It's really great. Like just how versatile like everything in the Magnoliverse is.
Well, I'll say everyone listening, that's the next story. Hellboy punching his way through time.
Yeah.
Just one story after the next.
I mean, that's
Perfect.
probably how it was pitched.
Yes, I would definitely agree with that. So for everyone listening, what's the best way to start finding about this project? When does this project end? How can they get into funding it currently?
Yeah. So the campaign runs through May 2nd. It's death.comicsbookcase.com. Will take you a shortcut right to the Kickstarter. I think if you Google search Death a Comics Bookcase, you'll also find it pretty easily. Uh, but yeah, the campaign will wrap on May 2nd. We've hit our funding goal. So at this point, we're working on stretch goals. We should be able to get to the first one, which will get everybody a paper upgrade and a cardstock cover. Um, and then like any kind of additional money we raise now goes right into making the sequel as soon as possible. And like Ryan and I were talking about, the book is done. So on May 2nd, the PDFs will go out. We'll just have to drop the thank yous in for people who back the thank you level tier, and then the PDFs will go out that day. Like there's no risk to it whatsoever. And then as soon as the money clears, like the designer has it, like he sent me the file to proof yesterday. Like it's laid out. With the exception of that thank you page, everything is ready. So like you'll have it, knock on wood, by the end of May, beginning of June at the soonest. I'm going to Heroes Con, and I'm hoping to have, which is like June 16th, I want to say, and I'm hoping to have a backpack full of comics to pass out to people and sell at that show. So that's it. Yeah. I'm talking about on like every social media platform. If you look for Comics Bookcase, also like not hard to find.
Awesome. And where's the best place to find you and stay up to date with you and what you're doing?
Probably I'm on Twitter and Blue Sky and Threads. So like it's like but I on comicsbookcase.com there's a place you can sign up for a newsletter. And that's the like most, because I don't know which platforms will be around here now, maybe them, who knows? Like, so like go to
Yeah.
comicsbookcase.com, find the newsletter, sign up, and get your email in there. If you really want to keep up with what I'm doing, that's the most reliable way to do it.
Awesome. And I guess to round it out, just to kind of give everyone kind of an idea of what's in plan next. So we obviously have volume 2, as long as everything kind of goes well with this campaign. Where else do you see this kind of venture going?
I'm gonna try as hard as I can to do something with the Werewolf Priest story. So like, it'll have a different name. Like it's kind of a monster of the week concept. Like it's not going to be 5 issues about a werewolf priest. The werewolf priest is kind of just to introduce people to that world. But yeah, like uh, I'm talking to editors about it. I'm getting that pitch in front of them. I'm going to a bunch of shows this summer to try to talk to more about it. So yeah, like hopefully that spins out of it. If I don't have much luck with that, you might find that on Kickstarter, maybe for October for like Halloween season. And then also Pat Scott and he drew the first one shot, and then the continuation is in there, 10 pages of Next Door #2. So we'd like to, I mean, we're getting together after the campaign ends to talk about where that goes and kind of make sure work gets started on that. So there'll be more of that one way or another, whether it's in the next anthology or a sequel to the first book. So yeah, there's a lot. Like I think this anthology has a bunch of first appearances of characters you'll see again, like not in the superhero sense, but
Yeah.
like, like it's a start for multiple things.
Awesome. Well, everyone listening, be on the lookout. You're going to see the link in the comments of this post on Instagram and on YouTube. Go over to Kickstarter, support this project so we can get volume 2. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for answering our questions, and we look forward to seeing this come out and seeing volume 2.
I appreciate that. Thanks for the great questions. Thanks for reading the book. I really appreciate that and having me on. This was a lot of fun.
No problem. Everyone listening, you could find this on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Thanks for listening. Have a good night.